So I'm guessing the reading today ended in a way that you didn't expect, or at least maybe you didn't expect that a story read in church would end that way, or somebody just stomping all over another person. Sometimes when we climb out of our ruts, it isn't graceful. The wife had been in a rut. She'd been used to making herself small, getting out of the way, doing whatever she had to do to shape her existence to meet his needs. She'd been backing up and backing up and backing up, giving herself up and the space that was hers to exist in order to support his extreme sensitivities, as the author called it. When we contort ourselves for that long, we get ill in our minds, in our bodies. And even though she sought help, professional help hadn't offered effective suggestions, and her spirit and her body were inflamed. Inspired by this mother cat feeding her kittens and batting at one successfully more and more firmly, she went home and stomped on those ganglia. She stomped not to hurt him, but to reclaim her space to exist, to create a better balance between the two of them. And probably because she was a little annoyed. That's realistic, right? That's a realistic story, that sometimes things have to get really bad before we're willing to address them. Sometimes we back ourselves into a corner and we don't see any options, and we think, there's nothing for me to do. This is all the other person's fault. And we just get sicker and more annoyed until we lose it, and then we come out and we stomp on other people, or we stomp on ourselves. Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication, says that we're taught actually by society to put ourselves into these corners. He said, "Long before I reached adulthood, I learned to communicate in an impersonal way, in a way that didn't require me to reveal what was going on inside of myself. When I encountered people or behaviors I didn't like or understand, I would react in terms of their wrongness. If my teachers assigned a task I didn't want to do, they were mean or unreasonable. If someone pulled out in front of me in traffic, my reaction was, 'You're an idiot.' When we speak this language, we think and we communicate in terms of what's wrong with others for behaving in certain ways, or occasionally what's wrong with ourselves for not understanding or responding as we would like. Our attention is put on classifying, analyzing, determining levels of wrongness, rather than on what we or others need and are not getting. Thus, he says, if my partner wants more affection than I'm giving them, they're needy or dependent. And if I want more affection than they're giving me, then they're being aloof and insensitive. If my colleague is more concerned about details than I am, he is picky and compulsive. If I'm more concerned about details than she is, she's sloppy and disorganized." Judgment puts us in a corner. It doesn't create a path forward. It creates a diagnosis, where the other person is often the one who has the problem. And if they have the problem, then there's nothing for me to do. I'm doing just fine. We end up digging that rut deeper and deeper, and we end up deepening the disconnection between us. And then what can we do about it? We're nice people. Right? Rabbi Friedman, Ed Friedman, who wrote that fable, he's the author of many books on family systems theory. He contends that we think we're being nice by not saying something to little John or to whoever the little John or Joanna or non-binary name, whoever that person is in our lives. We think that we're being nice by not saying anything, by stepping out of the way and just accepting little John as he is. But you can tell by the way the story unfolds that we are fooling ourselves if we think we can live like this, and that this is what it means to be nice. And Friedman says that religious institutions are the worst offenders at this, at being nice. He says in church after church, some member is passively aggressively holding the whole system hostage, and no one wants to fire him or force her to leave because it wouldn't be the Christian thing to do. And he says it has nothing to do with Christianity. Synagogues also tolerate abusers because it wouldn't be Christian. And you may object to this term, abuser. You could say it's a diagnosis. But another system thinker, he sometimes uses the term someone who's reactive. He says, regardless of which term we use, what I really want you to realize, not him, regardless of the term, what I really want you to hear in this, Steinke says, is that rather than facing off against reactive people, we make trade-offs. The reactive people are treated with kid gloves, and we mistake appeasing for being loving. We appease others, and we mistake it for love, for respect, for affirming another's worth or dignity. Affirming the worth and dignity of another person does not mean we become a doormat. And it doesn't mean we have to become stompers either. There's some middle ground. And it doesn't mean saying we affirm the worth and dignity of people doesn't mean we affirm the worth and dignity of all behavior. There's a difference between those two. And it also doesn't mean that we give up our own worth or dignity, because sadly, sometimes it just feels so much easier to do that, doesn't it? To just take it on ourselves, to just turn the other way, to just suck it up or pinch ourselves under the dining room table. But that's short-term thinking. Sure, you can keep that up at a holiday meal where maybe you see this person just once or twice a year. But if you work with this person, or you live with this person, or you're raising this person, or they're raising you, at some point, if we don't address it, we're going to end up stomping on them or ourselves. But we tell ourselves, well, I know what to say and what not to say to keep things intact or just calm around these people. But really, when we do that, we're focusing on them in a way that conveniently fills our awareness with them and their problems, so that we don't have to look at what is actually going on in me, that I'm more scared to take up my space or to ask for it or to say, this is happening right now and it's not okay with me. Why is it easier to just curl up and get small? Who taught us that we're not important, that our needs aren't important? Or when have we given belief to this idea that, well, that person's is difficult, so this is an okay way for me to live? And Rosenberg says, it's my belief that all such analyses of other human beings, calling them difficult, stubborn, the abuser, the reactive one, whatever, when we focus on calling them something and analyzing them, it's a tragic expression of our own values and needs. And he says these expressions are tragic because when we express our values and needs in this form, we increase defensiveness and resistance to our needs and values among the very people whose behaviors are of concern to us. Or, if we tell them in a way that's letting them know what they're doing, they might agree to act in harmony with our values because they concur with our analysis of their wrongfulness. But what's more likely is that they will do so out of fear, guilt, or shame. And we all pay dearly, he says, when people respond to our values and needs out of those emotions. When people don't respond from the desire to give out of their hearts, sooner or later, he says, we'll experience the consequences of diminished goodwill when people comply out of a sense of either external or internal coercion. And we all pay emotionally, and the person is likely to feel resentment and decreased self-esteem. And we decrease the likelihood of them responding compassionately in the future. We just end up pushing people away. We're actually trying to connect and get needs met, or we wouldn't be in that relationship in the first place. So when we diagnose, we're just pushing them away. And I don't think that's the change we want to be and the change we want to see in the world, right? How can we more quickly push people away to be alone and just have everything be comfortable? It's not really the conscious vision. So if we want to be the change we'd like to see in the world, there are two authors that I'm talking about today, Friedman and Rosenberg. They offer us some tools, that there is another way. Friedman shares the fable, he says, to help us see that we're not really loving another when we just always get out of their way and let them run rampant. He says, actually, we're fostering irresponsibility and immaturity in the other person. That actually, when we think someone can't handle their life if we don't do all these things for them, we're actually giving them a message that I don't think you can handle your life, which is shaming, which is not really the kind of loving presence we want to have with the people in our lives. He says when we do this, we just enmesh ourselves with them. But love is about being known. It's about being authentic. It's about whole people existing in relationship with one another, being responsible for ourselves in that connection. And when we make ourselves small and we say they're so difficult, we also let that person take us hostage. I think Friedman would have enjoyed the title of the service today, The Joy of Stepping on Eggshells. He has a great sense of humor, as you may have noticed in his fables. But that's one of his tools that he offers us, is how can we bring humor and lighten up, just lightening up. So he gave a talk to a bunch of Methodist ministers once that he called Family Party Poopers. And he talked about how we all have people in our lives who are party poopers. He said whether it's an alcoholic, a rageaholic, someone who criticizes everything you do, someone who is a bore or a loner who disappears, that we all have people that when we come together, we're trying not to set them off. We're trying to control what's going to happen. And he says, why don't we just lighten up, find some humor about it, free ourselves up from trying to stop the inevitable. We can't really tiptoe or walk on eggshells, people. So we might as well find some joy in stepping on them. And he says the way we do this is not by trying to take behaviors away from people, but push them towards it. Give them the things that we want to control, just give them back to them and free ourselves up. So here are some suggestions that he gives. With the person who gets drunk at every holiday or family dinner, he suggests walking up to the person when they arrive and say, here, this bottle is just for you. And I wonder, dinner's going to start in a half hour, so do you think you could get drunk and have your tirade before we sit down to eat? And with the bore, the person who goes on and tells you stories and teaches you about things that you never wanted to listen to and holds everyone hostage to listening to their stories, and you just try to keep stopping them from doing it, you could instead just lean in and be like, shh, shh, everybody, shh. Uncle so-and-so has something riveting to tell us all. And maybe it's about fertilizer or lint, I don't know, but I know it's going to be great. So people on the tape were also laughing, and people were also a little uncomfortable saying, this sounds really sarcastic and kind of hurtful or mean. And he said the idea isn't to be sarcastic or to make fun of anyone, it's to lighten ourselves up so that we can be more free in the setting. To let go of the things that we can't control. We keep pulling on them, trying to let go. For the loner, the person who's like, they disappear and they go read somewhere for hours and they're not a part of the family gathering. And you try to create just the right conditions so that they'll just stay and be with your grandchildren or, I just want everyone to be together. Well, instead, walk up and hand them a book and just say, is it time for you to go upstairs now for the rest of the night? And he says that we do this because we giggle. Sometimes we don't even have to actually say these things to people, right? We can just imagine or practice saying them before they arrive and see what fear meets you, the intensity in that moment of actually thinking about saying this thing. Well, that's the space where we contort ourselves in that whole meal, in that whole gathering, where we just hold our tongue and there's got to be a way between stomping and just sucking it up and taking it in and feeling all of those stress hormones and signals in our own bodies, which is toxic over time. You can imagine the joy and release we'll feel if we were just to step on those eggshells, that they're not really that precious, that they're not really what's holding our relationship together. It's not really much of an authentic connection if it's held by intact eggshells. So here's a few more of his suggestions. For the person who's the rageaholic, who just starts yelling about something, it's similar to the response to the alcoholic. You can go up to them and say, when do you think you're going to blow up? Do you think you could do it before we open gifts so we don't have to wonder when it's going to happen? Or with a criticizing or disapproving parent, someone who's always just niggling about little things that you don't do to their liking, you just go up to them and say, I stink at all of this. Why didn't you teach me how to do this better? So, number one tool with Friedman for doing things differently is lightening up. It's focusing on ourselves, not that person and what they bring to the setting, but focusing on ourselves and the space that we occupy and how we can do that differently. Perhaps using humor and pushing people towards their behaviors instead of trying to stop them. And Rosenberg offers a model for how we can communicate differently, where we do reveal what's going on inside of us instead of diagnosing someone else. And the main tool that he offers that I want to share with you today is getting clear about what our own needs are. He has a list, and I don't think many of us, before I came across this model, it wasn't something I thought about. It's much easier to get sucked into the story that I tell myself, the interpretations that I have of someone else's face or actions or words. But he's suggesting that in this model, we get in touch with our own needs, the needs that are not met. So he has this list, he has a feelings inventory, this list on the website of feelings when our needs are met and feelings when they are not, if you find yourself just not sure what's going on, that I have used. He also has a list, an inventory of needs. And here are some of the headings, the groupings for needs. They're around connection, physical well-being, needs for honesty, play, peace, autonomy, and meaning. And I know some of the ones that I most often need are under meaning or connection. The need to be seen and to see others more clearly. A need to be understood and to also understand. A need for ease. Doesn't that just sound great? Let's all just meet our needs for ease today. And when we tell someone in this model, we share observations, and then we share our feelings, and then we share our needs. This opens up space for understanding versus people picking up weapons to strike back or defend themselves. So when the husband says to the wife, "What are you doing? You could hurt me," she could have said, instead of stomping, she could have said something different. She could have said, when you walk towards me and ask me to move, I feel angry. I have a need to matter and to be seen, and the story I tell myself when I give up my space for you is that you're more important. And I wish I didn't tell myself that, but I need to find some new and better ways to meet my needs, to matter. And because underneath that anger, I actually feel sadness. I feel sadness that I tell myself, I don't matter as much as you. I wonder if you could help me try something new. Could you wait for me to move when I'm ready? Or could you just go a different way? The way we've been doing this is actually painful for me, and I don't want either of us to hurt, but I can't keep hurting myself so that you don't. That invites care, doesn't it? It's so different than saying, dude, you need to grow up. This whole world isn't about you. I'm also here, right? But you hear underneath that the need to be seen, to matter, to have a quality in their marriage. A marriage where I feel like, and it's not just something that's a concrete thing, right? It gives and takes, it moves over time, any of our relationships. And when we feel ourselves moving into taking too much space or too little, that's a moment where we can stop and think about, that's where our needs might be giving us thoughts and feelings that are just flags to say, I have something that I can tend to in myself. And when we clarify our needs, that's a way out of the corner. That is actually a way forward. It's not a diagnosis where then we become self-righteous, but it's a path of authenticity to connect us. And we can practice doing this more in our church. I taught a class this week, and I'll be offering more on nonviolent communication, so we can just practice shifting our language. I know I need practice. And we can practice shifting from analyzing to clarifying our needs and our stuck places. We can also lean into a tool that our faith offers us. We are a covenantal faith rather than a creedal faith. That means we make promises to one another. We care more about being in right relationship with each other and the earth as an expression of our faith than in people understanding why we're here, if there's a God, if there isn't, what happens when we die. Those kinds of beliefs aren't the core of our faith. And so when our groups create covenants, we can actually read them more often. We can check in on them. Because it's not just the role of the facilitator or the Soul Matters facilitator or the Wellspring facilitator or even the choir director. It's not their role to make sure everything goes well. We're all grown-ups. And we all are the people who make these covenants, so we can check in on them. We can say, ouch. We could say, if we don't have all the words, just, could we have a process check about how people feel about what's happening right now? Could we look at our covenant again? I don't feel right about what's happening right now. Martin Buber says that we are promise-making, promise-breaking, promise-renewing people, that we can practice this together. Let's start today where we are. Let's start today with the opportunities we have in our own relationships to be the change we want to see in the world, to lighten up, to free ourselves, to accept people and ourselves as we are, to bring authenticity in our communication. Let's practice the first principle of honoring our own dignity and worth in the presence of those we care about, even as we respect their dignity and worth. We can do what a recent fortune cookie said that I got at a restaurant. It said, "Your problem becomes a stepping stone. Make the most of it."